Okay, so I think we finished this tshuva last week. It was very interesting, this tshuva about the Masader Kiddushin using either a handkerchief or a pen to make the kinyan. And the reason why a handkerchief might be better is for the simple reason that if the Masader Kiddushin is still holding on to the object, and it's a handkerchief, then it works. It works without a problem because we view the portion that the chassan is holding as a kli, even if we were to imagine it cut in half, where the Masader Kiddushin is holding half and the chassan is holding half. A half a handkerchief, as long as it's got 3 by 3 fingers breadths, which is maybe 3 inches by 3, or maybe 2 inches by 2 inches, that's still considered a kli, and therefore he's made a legal transaction with a kinyan chalipin. If by contrast a pen is used, so and the Masader Kiddushin is still holding on to the pen, where the chassan takes hold of the other end of the pen, and they both lift it up together. So that's going to be problematic. And the reason it's problematic is because since the chassan is not holding it exclusively, you view him holding only half a pen, and half a pen is not a kli. Okay,
In this case, with the cap, be a kli potentially, the cap alone? Or maybe I'm not looking at this pen
Yeah.
properly, but if it has a cap.
This pen does have a cap. That's an interesting point. I'm not sure. Not sure. It's a good question, Paul. I don't know. But in any event, he says, don't. That's the idea being is that you avoid all of these issues, as long as you make sure that the chassan lifts it up by himself, and therefore you can use a pen or a handkerchief or any other kli that you want. It has to be a kli, though. Okay. All right. Okay. Now, here's another question having to do with recycling. Lekichat bakbukim rekim mitoch hamitkan hamiuchad lekach. Taking empty bottles out of the repository that is set aside for that purpose. Okay. Yesh etzleinu bishchuna, like you have like a recycling bin. So apparently in Israel, they have these big cages, big cages, and you just drop it in there. So yesh letzleinu bashchuna mitchan hamiyuad lahashlich letocho bakbukei shtiya rikim litzorech michzor. That's what we have. We have a big cage where you throw your empty bottles for the purpose of recycling. Michzor, isn't that an interesting word? Like to be choser is to come back. So that's recycling. Okay. B'toshavei hashchuna mashlichim letocho et kol habakbukim shelahem. The members of the neighborhood throw all their bottles in there. Ha'im mutar lakachat mehamitkan bakbukim hanechutzim litzrachim mesuyamim. Would it be permissible if, let's say, I need some bottles? My kid's got a science experiment in school, or I need a container in order to be able to, I'm making some homemade etrog liqueur, or who knows what else I could use it for. So could I take out certain containers out of that recycling thing? Because it's very easy just to stick your fingers in the cage and to pull out.
Like who owns those? Is someone going to get money for those?
Exactly. That's the question, back and forth. So let's see. Is it Hefker? Right? If it's Hefker, then it belongs to no one, and so anyone can take. Maybe it belongs to the municipality because they're going to take those bottles and recycle them and make money off of that. Who knows who it belongs to? So let's see. That's the thing we have to deliberate. So the tshuva is as follows. HaGemara omeret b'masechet Bava Batra. So here's a Gemara in Bava Basra. Ravu Shmuel Sovrim shekelav shel adam konim lo b'chol makom chutz me reshut harabim. Your utensils acquire the space below them anywhere except in a public thoroughfare. Meaning, if I put down a box on a private property with permission, then temporarily the space, the ground under the box belongs to me. So for various halachic purposes,
And liability.
and I guess liability as well, except if I put it down in a public thoroughfare. V'amar Rebbe Yavahu, Amar Rebbe Yochanan, Kelev shel Adam konim lo b'chol makom sheyesh lo reshus lahanicham sham. And Rebbe Yavahu says, anywhere where you have permission to put down a kli, the ground underneath the kli becomes yours temporarily while the kli is resting there. V'chach pasak maran b'shulchan aruch, Kelev shel Adam kol makom sheyesh lo reshus lahanicho kanalo. The Shulchan Aruch actually says this, that wherever you place your kalim down with permission, your kli acquires that space. The kevin shenichnesu hamitaltalim betoch hakli, and so if other items are deposited in that kli, ein echad mehem yachol lachzer bo. Neither party can retract on that as a transaction. So if I have, let's say, an empty box, I put it down on the ground, and you put a watch in that box, so my box is kona your watch, okay? And so therefore that's a legal method of transaction, so that if afterwards the person who's giving the watch wants to retract, once he put it in my box, he cannot withdraw that transaction, okay? And it's as if you put it in my house. Just like my house acquires items for me legally, so too putting it in my box does the same thing. And therefore, that's only going to work if it's on a place where I have permission to put them. But let's say the guy who's selling the watch says, does not give me permission to put my box down. And I just put it down, and the seller puts the item in the box. Well, since it's his domain, he could say, I don't want your box to be Kona, and he could prevent that from happening. Or let's say it's in a public thoroughfare. If I put my box down in a Reshus Harabim, which belongs to everyone, and I don't have permission to put my stuff in a Reshus Harabim and just leave it there, so then my box will not be Kona. Uveseif Aleph Sham Kasav Maran, and so in that same siman, the Shulchan Aruch writes, Hayu metaltalin b'Reshus halokeach hamishtamer lida'ato. If there were utensils that were in the purchaser's property, and he's watching over those objects, Oshahu omed bitzad oto rishus, or let's say it's not in his on his property, but he's standing nearby on that property. Kevin shekibel alav hamocher limkor kana lokeach. Once the seller agrees to sell, the buyer can legally acquire those items by having them placed in the box. Mashma she'im lo mishtamer ledat halokeach. The implication being that if the buyer is not standing by, watching over the things that are put into that container, afal pishu hu mishtamer ledat hamocher, even though the seller is watching over it and is protecting the area, chatzero lo kona lo shahachatzer yesh ladin yado shliach shehem mishumarim ledaato. Then the courtyard where the box is placed will not be able to acquire on behalf of the buyer if he's not there, because it only works through the concept of either yad or shaliach, which we're not going to get into the technicalities of what's the difference between yad or shaliach. The term yad means it's an extension of my hand. The word shaliach is that the box is acting as my proxy. Either way you look at it, and there's a big machlokus as far as how does a person's utensil acquire? Is it through yaders or through shaliach? It doesn't really matter for our purposes, but if the buyer who owns the box is not standing by and watching over it and making sure that it's in a protected area, then it cannot be kona. Kevin shahabak bukim ha'ilu nitnu b'mitkan hamichzor sheshayach lechevrat hamichzor. And so therefore, These bottles are placed in a receptacle for recycling. And who does this belong to? It belongs to the recycling company. Apparently, the recycling company makes probably some kind of contract with the municipality that you let us put our cage there, and we'll pay you an annuity or some kind of percentage of whatever we're able to make from these empty bottles. So yesh lemitkan din chatzer she'ena mishtameret. So it has this cage, therefore has a status of a chatzer she'ena mishtameret. It's an unwatched utensil. Kaven she'efsher bekalut lahotzi mimena, because anyone can easily pull stuff out of it. Ube'aleha enam omdim bitzida. The owners are not standing next to the container. So therefore, lachein ein kan kinyan chatzer. And therefore, the owner of the cage does not automatically acquire the bottles just because they've been placed in the cage. That's what we want. That's what Rav Sharaga wants to establish by looking at the Shulchan Aruch. V'yachol kol echad lakachat et habakbukim. And therefore, according to the Shulchan Aruch, anyone would be allowed to take the bottles because they're still considered to be hefker, since they have not been acquired by this municipality or by the company that contracts with the municipality. Okay, so that's the first thing that he wants to establish. Ulam ledat harama. So I guess the same thing. You know, there's this show I've seen on social media called Trash Bin Divers. Or no, what is it? What is it called? Yeah, no, I'm telling you, it's a real thing. What do you call those big bins? The garbage bins. Yeah, garbage bin divers. Yeah, the garbage bin divers. What they do is they'll go to the back of a Walmart or in a mall, and they'll go and
Dumpster.
Very good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Dumpster divers, or I think it's called. And they
Nice
will go,
alliteration.
they will go into these dumpsters, and they will see what they can find that the store throws away. And they post these videos because, like, a lot of times, if it's a supermarket, I think by law they're not allowed to sell expired products. And so what they do is they lock the dumpsters to prevent people from doing dumpster diving, right? But with some other stores, let's say like a Walmart or some other kind of retail operation, will throw out, let's say, appliances that they couldn't sell, and for whatever reason they didn't sell to a closeout place. And you'll sometimes pick up, some tchotchkes. Yeah. And so that's, I don't know why it came up in my feed, but it's an interesting concept. And then, it's like,
because I knew you were going to learn about this.
That's right. So the question is, who does that belong to? Yeah. Who does the stuff that's thrown in a dumpster, who does it belong to? And you could argue that the dumpster is the property of the sanitation company that regularly empties the dumpster, but it's not mishtameret. It's not there. It's not watched by the dumpster company. They don't really care as long as you don't make a huge mess. They don't care if people dive into their dumpsters and pull out stuff.
They just want their rent.
Yeah, right. That's all they care about.
Empty every month.
Right.
And for people throwing out, like, I'd be happy if somebody came in and took things out of my garbage, because it gives me more room to throw more things away.
Actually,
That's
yeah.
an issue, who owns your garbage. Let's say you
Yeah.
throw your garbage out, and there are people that go through your garbage, right?
You're right.
That's right, all the
The
time.
guy on the bike who drives around.
Yeah.
And also, so the police too, for example, unreasonable search and seizure, can they got their eyes on you, they wanna know whether or not they can search your garbage without a warrant. And I think the answer is yes.
Right. I think, wasn't there a famous during the Watergate years? Didn't they go
Yes,
through
with Nixon.
with Nixon's garbage or something? The FBI went through his garbage, and there was a whole
Well, they
legal
always do
question.
that to try to get DNA on a guy who they're suspecting for, a more serious crime.
Yeah. So the difference here is that when you throw something away, you don't care what happens to it. But here you have a company that is a recycling company. They pay good money to set this up in the neighborhood. And every time you take away a bottle, you're taking away maybe a penny or 2 pennies
Yeah.
from the recycling company. Okay, it might even be a shava pruta, right? And if it's a shava pruta, there may be a question of geneva. However, what Rav Sharaga is trying to establish is that according to the Mechaber, the company has not yet been kona those bottles. It's not their property until they actually come and take the bottles out of that dumpster or out of that cage. Ulam, so he says, however, Lidas HaRama, Shebemecher o b'matana maspikim achatzer meshumeret lidat hakoneh o hamocher. The Rama says that the buyer doesn't have to be attendant in order for his kli to be kona. As long as the seller is attendant and the seller is okay to have in mind that this container should be kona on behalf of the mocher, on behalf of the kona. Harekan hi mishtameret ledat ha'adam shehiniach sham et habakbukim b'shah shehinicham b'mitkan. So, in a sense, the person who's throwing away his plastic bottles, let's say, he has in mind to when he throws his bottles in there, it is in a sense watched over by the person who's throwing his bottles there. Uvaofen shadat acheret maknelo, and if let's say in a situation where I put my item in your container with the intention of you being kona through your container, zachsa chevras hamichzor bebakbukim al yedei kinyan chatzer. According to the Rama, the recycling company would acquire those bottles based on the intent of the depositor. In other words, when the depositor puts his bottles in there, he could have easily thrown them into the regular garbage dumpster. But he wants to be a good citizen and he wants to recycle. So he wants these bottles to go for recycling. So when he puts the bottles in the cage, his intention is, I want the recycling company to take these bottles and recycle them. Ulefi zeh asur l'shum adam lakachat shum davar mehamidkan. According to the Rama, it would not be permitted for a person to take bottles out of the recycling cage. And in the Makor Baruch, he quotes the Rama. He says, V'zeh loshon harama sham, v'yesh cholkin usvir lehu debemecher o matana, im meshumar ledas hamocher o hanote, sage. He says, the Rama says some disagree with the Mechaber. The Mechaber says that in order for a buyer's receptacle to be kona, the buyer has to be watching over the area. But the Rama says that some disagree. And as long as the seller or some other party who can control the transaction wants the buyer's receptacle to be kona, that's sufficient. And that seems to be the way we paskin. So it turns out that whether or not you can take a bottle from the receptacle, from this cage, will depend on a machlokas between the Mechaber and the Rama. Ubir hasma the dafka b'mitzia b'inyan sheyehei mishumar ledat hazocheba, that it's only when it comes to a mitzia, a lost item, where the only person who can acquire it is the finder, mishum delesham das acheres maknel, because there's no one there that's putting it in the receptacle with intent. That's where we need the kona to be present. Aval b'mecher u'matana diyesh acher demakne lahalokeach or lahamakabel matana. But when it comes to a transaction, let's say a gift or a sale, there, as long as the seller is present and intends for the buyer's receptacle to be kona, the buyer's receptacle will be kona. Shmiraso da'amakna avakashmira da'akona. So then that's sufficient. And the depositor's thoughts about the the recycling company being kona his bottle is sufficient for once he puts the bottle in there, the recycling company now becomes the owner of those bottles.
So conceptually, each bottle could be different depending on who put it in. Some person might just throw it out and not even know about it. The recycling company just wants to get rid of it. And another person might want.
Well, do you really think that that's the case? Why would you assume that, Paul? I mean, wouldn't you normally assume that if I see a cage which that's just for bottles, it's for recycling?
Right, but I'm just saying he doesn't care about someone making money on the other end. He just wants to get rid of his bottle. He's just throwing that out. Just passing by and he's finished his Coke.
Yeah, but I think that it's implicit. No, don't you think it's implicit
I
that?
think a clearer case might be that some of these charity boxes where people put their clothing.
Yes,
in them.
I would agree. I would
Keeping it
agree.
with boxes.
You know, that's right. A charity, one of those charity bins.
You can't get in those charity boxes.
Right, but they've now done that.
Somebody
because-
wants to, they couldn't
Because
get out.
people have
It's
tried,
not-
people have tried to, because people have tried to, that's why they've made it.
But it is interesting, but because sometimes I've walked by one of those bins because they have them behind the church on Brook, Avenue.
Yeah.
So my wife and I walk there sometimes, and so they have one of those bins, and sometimes the bins are so full that people just leave stuff next to it.
Yeah.
And that would be interesting because the truth is, that it's the desire of the person who put it there for the charity to acquire it. And it could be that the property of the church then acquires
The
it.
charity gives it to someone that's poor. If someone's poor goes by, they let it take it then. It's for the poor.
Probably not. Probably they wouldn't be allowed to because
Reality is it's not even for the poor. They take that and they break it down the fabric and then they send it to Africa and they use that. Yeah, it's a business. It's a business. It's not for the poor. Unfortunately.
that's interesting.
Yeah. You hear about that, Martin?
Even the Jewish ones,
My
even the
neighbor
B'nai
in
B'rith?
Markham used to do that
But,
business.
yeah.
It's incredible.
I mean, Chabad does it. JRCC does it. That's
Yeah.
their
That's
business.
just why I know frills.
Oh, yeah?
Box.
But the truth is, why did you say it's unfortunate? At least the charity's making money.
Well, people
I
think.
don't know if it's really going on charity.
Are people doing?
I don't
it to
know if
give-
it's a real, is it a business or is it?
I know the guy who owns the recycling business of the clothing. They separate the clothing, they sell it to poor countries.
Yeah, so
But
but doesn't,
I don't know how much the NCSY gets, but I know that the business
Well,
they sell.
We're
but
back
they're
to-
definitely getting a cut. NCSY is definitely
But
getting a
people think
cut.
the whole
They have to get
clothing,
something because they have their name, maybe sales advertising that they get,
Yeah.
I don't know.
yeah, it's
I
back
think
to what we
that's
talked about last week with the charity.
51% or 80%.
Mhm.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, from our last Shiloh, right?
And if someone gives an item of clothing hoping that a poor person will wear it, in Canada, then it's kind of misleading.
Yeah, but
We're saying it's not.
there's no misrepresentation on behalf of the dumpster. Because they're not saying, we'll make sure that your threadbare suit that you've been wearing for 30 years, we'll make sure a poor person gets to wear that after you, right? Anyway, Nibsa da hasma bir kavanas harama de v'mecher o matana yesh kinyan chatzer kevin sha'chatzer mishumeret ledat hamocher o hanotein. So that's how the Sma understands the Rama, that any kind of transaction where I'm transferring over an item, right? So there is this kinyan chatzar that the receptacle itself is being kona on behalf of the buyer, as long as either the seller or the buyer, or meaning the giver and the taker, are present or at least have intent for the receptacle to be kona. Omnam b'ktzos ha-choshen kosav, dehecha diyishtas acheres makna, lo tzarich she'hachatzer tiya mishtameret ledat hamocher o hanotein. But it turns out the ktzos slightly is even more liberal. He says you don't need the chatzar to be mishtamer. It doesn't have to be watched over by any party, even if it's not watched over. It's like just out in the open, as long as one of the two parties has intent that that receptacle will be kona, then that's sufficient for the transaction to take place. Ubir zos al pi hashita mekubetzes bava metzia, Dekiven shahamocher sam et hachefetz ba'otach chatzer kedei shirak hakona yizka b'chefetz v'lo acher. The reason is because since the seller wants that the receptacle to be there, so that the buyer will be able to be kona the object, and no one else, memela hachefetz mishumar sham, then we assume that the receptacle is watched over, or in some way it is being placed with intent so that it should remain there for a purpose. Ki reshut la'af echad acher lekachto, because permission is not granted to take it because of Shetvaref Nechmadim Mipaza Ein Sham, and the Ksos is very enamored by this statement. Va'ayin od nesivas sham tisfirle me'asma v'chalak al dereshita mekubetzes anal shehevi aktzos achoshen. Okay, so he goes into this lengthy discussion, but the bottom line is that as long as I put the receptacle there with intent for it to be kona, then it's kona automatically according to a number of poskim, right? And you don't need that anyone has to be standing there. Okay.
Rabbi, if they put a sign on it that said, this owner of the company do not take, that would be enough?
It sounds like they don't even need to. They don't even need to put those words. As long as it just says, place your recyclables here, that's enough for the recycling company that put the receptacle there to be kona the bottles according to the Rama. They're automatically kona. So that's the Rama's shita. Omnam hashach herich lahochiach mikam arayas mehashas v'haposkim sheha'ikar kedas maran shechatzer she'ena mishtameres ena kona afilu b'das acheres maknalo. The Shach, however, says that he doesn't agree with the Rama. And he says that if it's in an unprotected area where no one's watching over the receptacle, then it doesn't automatically kona it, even when you have one of the parties wants the transaction to take place. And he writes that basically it's a suffix. So now we basically have three opinions. We have the opinion of the Shulchan Aruch, who says that unless the buyer, the acquirer is present, watching each bottle being put in the receptacle will not be kona. We have the opinion of the Rama, who says that you don't need the buyer or the seller to be present as long as the intent of the person who puts the bottle there, that it should go for recycling, that's all that's needed for the recycling bin to be kona for the recycling company. And then you have the Shach, who says that it's a suffix. We're not sure whether the transaction on that bottle has taken place or not.
Even if it's a suffix, it'd be the plumber though, right? Because it's Geneva.
Well, it's a suffix Geneva, if I go ahead and take those,
So
yeah.
you got two against one.
Seems like it. All right, but we're not done yet. We still have more to see. Okay. So Omnam Kosav Hashita Mikubetzis B'Shem Harashba Shedin Zeh Shekelim Konim Humidin Kinyan Chatzer. The Shita Mekubetzes writes in the name of the Rashba, when we say that a receptacle is kona, it's because it's kona midin chatzer, not because the receptacle is your shaliach or an extension of your body, which would be a compelling argument to require you to be present, but rather it's kona because it's like your courtyard. It's like if someone were to throw a newspaper into my backyard is kona the newspaper. So a person can't come in, or even my front yard. Person can't come on my front yard and take my newspaper because my front yard has already been kona, because things that are deposited on my courtyard are kona automatically. Because of hanasivos da hagdaras chatzer mishtameres he dechol sheyesh mechitzo saviv hechatzer kona kol masha besocha afal pi she'ena neula bimin ol. The Nesivos writes, what is considered to be a chatzer hamishtameret, a protected chatzer that is kona? It has to have a fence around the ground, and if it's fenced, even if it's not locked, it's just fenced, that's enough for my courtyard to be kona. So it could be that according to this definition, if he throws it into a front yard that is a fence, a picket fence around it, my chutzner is Kona the newspaper. If it's an unfenced front yard, which most are in our neighborhood, so then the newspaper it has not been acquired by my property. But how does this pertain to the recycling bin? That's a fenced property. Even though it's not protected or locked, it's nonetheless a protected property because there's a cage around it, right? As long as it has walls, it's considered to be a protected area. We'll have to continue this tshuva tomorrow.
Your recycling bin in front of your house is the same thing.
Yeah. As long as the items are well inside of it. Yes, that's true. So, but the question is, what is the intent when you put stuff in the recycling bin? We'll have to think about that tomorrow. Okay, have a great day, everybody.
Good day.